Thank you for being here, for one. There's a few other talks going on. We're closing out the day. Is anybody here till tomorrow or Thursday? Going back? How many locals do we got? Okay, sweet. Cool. A huge thank you to DevReach. I spoke at DevReach a few years ago in Bulgaria, Sofia, Bulgaria, had a blast. I got the opportunity to come back. So if you see anybody that is here that works for Progress in any type of capacity, tell them thank you, right? Tell them thank you. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have this amazing community. And there's multiple communities that are around all of this community. So a huge thank you to DevReach and Progress. If you're on Twitter, hopefully all of you are on Twitter. This is the official hashtag for the event, DevReach 2022. If you are taking pictures and you're tweeting those pictures, please make sure you are providing alternative text in those tweets. Because if not, and I retweet it, I will get the hammer from many people in this community. If you haven't figured it out by now, I'm not going to be talking about CSS in this talk. This is going to be one of the many accessibility talks I give. I'm an accessibility advocate. I love the CSS talk that I do give. It's very powerful. I built my career on CSS and UX and accessibility. I'm not a JavaScript developer. I don't write a lick of JavaScript, and I plan to keep it that way. Now, some JavaScript engineers in here are like, I see you back there, Brocky. But I'm a big accessibility advocate. I travel all around the world and do workshops on accessibility and talks on accessibility, but I also talk a lot on CSS. It's a very valuable skill, but I'm trying to keep with the accessibility theme that I have brought to DevReach. I did a workshop on Sunday. I was in a mental health, accessibility, neurodiversity panel a couple hours ago, I think an hour ago, 2 hours ago. So I'm going to stick with this because accessibility is very, very important, and there needs to be more people out there that are talking about it, and we need to be more cognizant of it, and it needs to be normalized. So that's what I'm here going to talk to you all about today. Also, if you could throw this hashtag, look at that fly, you see that? It's like, pew. If you could throw this on your tweets, hashtag developer community if you are on Twitter. I love the developer community. I love the developer community. Y'all are the reason why I do what I do. I've given up weekends to be at events, to speak. I also have a life. You know, I paintball, I ride dirt bikes, I collect tattoos. I do a lot of things. But the second I'm given an opportunity to not be in front of a camera to speak, I'm going to try and take advantage of that. Because I'm not just here to teach you, I want you to teach me. I want to learn something from you. And if you know about everything I'm talking about in this talk, if you do work in the accessibility space, that's great. All it takes is that one person. We good? Sweet. I'm going to play this video for you. This is from Apple. I'm not sponsored by Apple. I'm not endorsed by Apple. I don't get paid by Apple. I use a lot of Apple products. But I show it before every accessibility talk, and I know the lights in here suck, and they're going to drown out this. I mean, the lights probably don't suck, but it's just going to drown out a lot of stuff. There's only some darkness through here. But hopefully, you'll be able to see it. I have captions on. There's a reason I play this before every single talk I give. And I want to know what y'all think after I play it. Hopefully you can hear it as well. Thank you.
But that's not the way I see it. You can catch up with friends.
Ready?
You can capture a moment with your family.
One face, small face, focus lock.
And you can start the day bright and early. You can take a trip to somewhere new.
3 miles to the summit.
You can concentrate on every word of a story.
A bird began to sing. Jack opened his eyes.
You can take the long way home. Or edit a film like this one. When technology is designed for everyone, it lets anyone do what they love, including me.
This is a very powerful video. There's a reason I show this video before every accessibility talk and or workshop that I give. Why do I show this? I want to hear from you. Yell it out. Why do I show this? Why does this matter? It usually is blank for like the first 30 seconds. Like, I don't know. Yes? It allows products to be used by everybody. Great answer. What else? Different people have different needs. What else?
Technology allows, sorry, English isn't the first language.
That's okay.
Technology allows, gives the ability to provide products, services, games to everyone.
Technology makes it possible for everybody to use it. What else? We could sit up here all day and talk about why this matters. It shows that we are bigger than the world. All too many times we design things that we think are cool, that we think are sweet. I'm guilty of it. When I started writing code, I was really young. I thought black backgrounds and little font and all this other stuff was cool. Like, that was sweet. In the days of Angel Fire, who started on Angel Fire? GeoCities, a Notepad on a Windows 95 machine, a P2, right? Look at these flies. It is. I hope it's not a bee, because I don't think I'm allergic. I know I'm not allergic, but really, damn fly. He's gonna mess with me. He's gonna mess with me. But all too many times we are building stuff that we think is cool. 9 times out of 10, we don't matter, unless it's us in that user's shoes. If you're familiar with Nielsen's design principles. One of them, paraphrased, is putting yourself in the user's shoes, right? Think like the user would think. Think of how the user might think, how they might use this technology that you're shipping. We are just a small piece of this thing we call the web and what we're building for on the web. They are the users, and we might be too. But Chris, why do you care so much about accessibility? Why do you give up your weekends, and why do you travel, and don't you hate planes and flying and hotels and hotel food and jet lag and putting talks together a week before they need to be put? This was not like that. I'm just going to put that out there. I do this talk a lot. I love this talk. It always is updated. Why do I care so much? My answer is easy. My mom is a boomer. She's 66, 2-time cancer survivor. She's about this big, from Detroit. Don't look at her wrong. She gets acrylic nails done. She will punch you. Trust me. And she loves her gold. She's got rings. But I got to really talk really loud for her to hear me, even if I'm this close, because she's losing her hearing. So we have one type of disability. She wears glasses. She actually was diagnosed with macular degeneration of one of her eyes. If you're familiar with degeneration, specifically macular degeneration, you don't come back from that. At some point, she will lose everything in one of her eyes. Luckily, she's taking medication and vitamins now to kind of pause the progress of that. So we have a vision disability. I could have talked to her this morning, said, hey, Mom, I'm giving a talk at 4:05, 4:10, 4:15 today in Boston. I could have talked to her 20 minutes ago, and she would have said, hey, what are you doing, son? No clue that I told her what I was doing this morning. But she can remember something from October 13th, 1977, like that. What she was wearing, who she was with, what kind of beer she was drinking, what kind of cigarettes she was smoking, what kind of shoes she had on. So we have a cognitive disability. My mom has arthritis, really bad arthritis. It runs in our family. Her bones crack when she walks. Her nerves hurt her. When your nerves hurt you, that is a problem. So she has mobility disability. Now, knock on wood, she doesn't have any external types of situational or temporary impairments. I don't like calling them disabilities. I like to call them impairments. Broken hand, broken arm, broken finger, broken foot. If you are a parent, you may have had a newborn at some point in your life where you've had to hold your child and work on a computer and use a mouse and a keyboard. My mom has a flip phone. She's never used a computer. She's old school with a typewriter. She might not even be able to do that, but she's always had nails, so she's always. So we have some type of temporary impairments, but she does have a lot of internal impairments. I have internal impairments. If you were at the neurodiversity panel, you would know what those impairments are. If you were part of my inner circle, you would know what those impairments are. But now you're all part of my inner circle, so I'll let you know. I suffer from debilitating health anxiety with accompanying OCD. I wake up every day thinking I'm going to die of a terminal disease. Nothing helps. That's my life. That's my impairment. You wouldn't be able to tell, but a lot of you in here have your own AT that you have right now. Assistive technology. If you were wearing glasses or contacts, that is your AT. My mom is my why. If I can make an accessible user experience for her at the end of the day, I have done my job as a worker on the web. She's my motivation, even though she doesn't use technology. But there are people out there like her who do. It is our job not to F that up. So if you didn't know what your why was, what your motivation was, I hope that you leave this talk, reflect, and maybe that light bulb will go off and you'll figure out what your why is, and it might be you. That's me. My name is Chris. You can catch me on Twitter at @SaltandBurnham, right there. If you are a Supernatural fan, you will understand what Salt and Burnham means. I'm a senior UI engineer. I work at Rocket Mortgage, but recently I just accepted a gig at Split as a dev advocate. So next couple weeks I'll be starting at Split as a developer advocate. I have a big background in DevRel and writing code. I've been a front-end developer since 1996. But I love speaking. I love doing the community thing. If you don't want to open up Twitter and go to Salt and search Salt and Burnham, you can scan this QR code and boom, it'll pull it up. Hit follow if you want to. I'm not saying you have to. But while I'll leave this up for a minute. I used to have some other slides about me, and people don't really they do the intro stuff and hear about it. I'm sorry that you feel that way, but it is up to me to tell you that I am a human, and I'm not just up here to blow smoke. I have other personalities besides writing code and speaking, okay? Well, I got some feedback from a conference one time, and they said, Chris, we don't give a shit about you. We only care about your talk. That hit me in the feels pretty hard. I took that stuff out. And at some point I was like, you know what? They need to know that I'm actually a person. So I put it back in. So a little bit more about me. I'm an international speaker. I love horror and spooky stuff. That's kind of my life. And I love tattoos, if you clearly couldn't tell that I love tattoos. I also have recognitions in many things. I'm a GDE, Web Developer Expert with Google, Microsoft MVP, Media Developer Expert with Cloudinary, Auth0 Ambassador, and I'm also part of the Progress Ninjas program as well, which is really dope. And I also believe in all three of these things. Does anybody believe in Bigfoot? Raise your hand. Nobody believes in Bigfoot? What? Never had nobody raise their hands. What about UFOs? Anybody believe in UFOs? Okay, I like that. What about ghosts? Anybody believe in ghosts? What about Bigfoot, UFO, ghosts? Think about it. Think about how come nobody's ever been able to catch Bigfoot? Maybe he's a ghost. Right? There you go. We don't know. Something to think about. This is extremely hard to see, but that's okay. Common accessibility pitfalls, climbing out when you fall in. This is the title of the talk. I did go with a Alice in Wonderland type of theme with this one. I usually do the spooky horror stuff. I switched it up, flipped the script a little bit. Question time. If I had to ask you how many people around the world have some type of disability, what would your answer be? A lot? I like that. What do you have, Dave? More than one. I've never heard that one before, but that's a great. More than one. I would say everyone, right? Whether it's hidden or not hidden, I would say everyone has some type of disability. And not just the 5 that I was talking about, but according to the WHO, the CDC, 1 billion people around the world have some type of disability. So what does that break down to? 20 to 25%. I'd say a little higher on the 35%, depending if you're talking about internal things that are going on. Internal and external, right? But Chris, All the stuff that our users are using, it's all intranet. We don't have anybody with disabilities that work here. Internalize that 20%, that 30%, that 35%. That percentage of people within your workforce has some type of disability. Whether you like it or not, it's true. They don't have to offer that information to you. They don't have to come up to you and say, hey, how you doing? I'm Chris, I have deuteranopia. Do you know what that is? They don't have to do that. They're not obligated to offer that information to you. They can if they want. You might not find out until you're given colors from a branding team or a marketing team, and this person is trying to write the code to make it work, or your BA or your QA is doing testing, and they say, hey, we can't see I can't see what's going on here. I've worked with people that way. Color vision deficiencies. I worked with a developer who was deaf in one ear. And her biggest struggle was video on the internet without captions or transcripts. Internalize that 20% to 35%. Okay, who has heard this term before? And if you have, A11Y or ALI or ALI, has anybody heard of this term before? And the people that know who it is, don't cheat, okay? Because I'm going to ask a question here. Does anybody know what this means? The meaning of the word. Not what the word stands for, but what that technical term for this is. If you think you know what it is, shout it out. It's called a numeronym. And what a numeronym is you take the first letter, you take the last letter, you count the letters in between, and you get your numeronym. Who works in internationalization? I'm assuming everybody should be doing that, right? I-18N, that's a numeronym. Who works in localization? Everybody should be. L10N. Who works in Kubernetes space? Not everybody should. K8S. Those are all numeronyms that you're going to see out in the wild. So if you hear the term A11Y in the context of web and software, chances are that person is talking about accessibility, web accessibility. So that brings me to the next topic. What is accessibility? That is a very loaded answer because there are plenty of things that can be accessible. When you say this, you're talking also about ADA, you're talking about WCAG, you're talking about 508, you're talking about UK laws, you're talking about all the laws all around the world. We are talking specifically about web accessibility. WCAG, and I'll get into what WCAG is. W3 says this: web accessibility means that people with disabilities can use the web. I don't like what the W3 is saying, not to be confused with W3 schools. The W3 is comprised of a bunch of amazing people, very smart people. But if this is an open web, and an open web is an inclusive web, and an inclusive web means a web for all, this is a better definition. This is my definition. Web accessibility means that people with disability, or web accessibility means that everyone can use the web. Everyone should be able to have an amazing, accessible user experience, regardless if they have a disability or impairment. We are not shipping 10 different experiences to our users. We are shipping one, and everybody will benefit from that. And if you use an overlay, come and talk to me after this talk, because get rid of that today. You should not be using an overlay for your experience. It does more damage than it does good. And if you don't believe me, I have a lot of people that can tell you why that is. There's even a website dedicated to why you should not use accessible overlays. It's snake oil. It's being sold to you to make the experience better. It does nothing that helps the user. It helps nothing that helps the people. This is another quote of mine. Accessibility is not just a requirement. It is a must. This is something you must care about. Yes, we are in this for money. We are privileged. We get paid well. It's no joke. Everybody knows it. But I am very much in this for the user. I give about what I'm doing. And I'm not saying none of y'all do. You're here for a reason. But it's our job to care as workers on the web. Design, QA, BA, front end, back end, PO, PM, director, VP, all of that. It's your job to care. And if you don't care, you're just a naughty person and you need to rethink your status on what you're doing. So when we talk about disabilities, we talk about 5, but they're not limited to these 5. We got hearing, we have conductive hearing loss, sensory neural hearing loss, and a mix of those. We have cognitive disabilities, math comprehension, reading comprehension, autism. Mobility disabilities, MS, or multiple sclerosis, MS, arthritis, Bell's palsy, could even be thrown in there, which is temporary, actually. Temporary impairments, broken hand, broken arm, broken finger, situational. And then vision, cognitive or color vision deficiencies or color blindness, field of vision disabilities. These are low vision disabilities. Low vision and poor vision are different. Poor vision can be corrected with glasses, contacts, LASIK. Low vision cannot be corrected. You will have that the rest of your life. Macular degeneration, Stargardt's disease, is a form of low vision. Great, Chris, so you're talking about all of these things and why it matters, and it does matter. Let's get into some meat about these things. And this is not going to be a deep dive into all of the low-hanging fruit. Make sure you buy my book when it comes out, and we can do that. Hashtag shameless plug, just like Dave does with his Blazor book. Do we have guidelines? We do have guidelines, and those are the WCAG 2.1, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are the things that govern how we build out web experiences for our users. Tons of information out there about the WCAG when it comes to Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's a small caveat, though. Not all of the things that I'm going to be talking about have conformance levels, okay? So when we talk about WCAG, we have this thing called POUR. And what POUR is, I don't know if there's a Blazor equivalent to this, Dave, but POUR are the 4 main guiding principles of accessibility. These guiding principles stand for it is POUR. Perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. POUR. Eat, sleep, and breathe this acronym, because these are what guide us to creating the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Now, I'm not going to go into each one of these stand for. You can do plenty of research out there. My buddy Homer Gaines, who had the music, he's actually a music person as well. He is very big in the accessibility space and gives talks all around the world. Him and I are going to be together a few times this year, so hopefully y'all get to go to those conferences if you can. But he gives a talk on POUR and just POUR. So if you get a chance to peep that, it's really, really good. So these all lead to levels of conformance. We have 3 levels of conformance when it comes to accessibility. We have A, AA, and AAA. A is kind of like Web Dev 101. You should be doing everything right. You're going to hit A. You should be striving to hit AA. That should be your company standard. Hopefully your company has accessibility statements. I hope they do. WCAG 2.1 is where you should be, and you should be striving to hit that. Nothing will ever be 100% accessible, ever. This is your true north, AA. Because things change, people change, technology changes, the web changes. AAA, you're never going to hit. You're not going to hit it unless you work for education or some type of government agency. You're required to have AAA. I'm pretty sure you're required. The guidelines might have changed. But one thing to make things AAA compliant, let's say you have a video on the web, right? You need closed captioning, you need a transcript, and you also need an accompanying video, like a picture-in-picture. It doesn't have to be picture-in-picture. I think that would make it easier, of somebody doing American Sign Language. To hit AAA, that costs a lot of resources, not people. I'm talking about money and time. You're already there doing the work. I don't need more people to do the work, right? But it's going to take time. A, AA, AAA. In a couple years, though, this is going to change to bronze, silver, and gold. Why they're doing that, I don't know. But they're changing the conformance levels to be bronze, silver, and gold, and getting away from A, AA, AAA. Cool, we learned about all this cool stuff. We learned about a handful of different types of disabilities. I like saying sensory neural. I love that word. It took me forever to remember how to say that. But I love letting everybody know about these different types of disabilities, because it's not just blind and deaf. I'm sick of hearing that. You must have a disability. Oh, are you deaf or blind? That is a bold statement to make. It's not just 1 or a 0 in this case. So what are the pitfalls, Chris? This is a big one. Stop using divs. Okay, how many front-end devs are in this room? Front-end, not full stack. Put your hand down, Dave, Ed. Front-end only. Okay. Get out of this room. You just offended me. You know what? No. Did anybody go to Dave's talk? I'm taking a tangent. Anybody go to Dave's talk besides me and Brocky and Ed? Y'all did? Okay, cool. Dave's great. Make sure you buy his book when it comes out. Stop using divs. Who's a back-end dev? Who's using Bootstrap? Who's using Foundation? Okay, good. Stop using divs, please. A div means nothing. Open up a web development book and find the definition of div. What's it going to tell you it is? A non-semantic dividing element. Great. Now what? It's a divider. Div is a divider of the page, right? There is no semantic meaning behind a div. It doesn't have any inherent accessibility properties and principles and states. There's a great quote out there, and I use it in my workshop, and I forgot who it's by. It's not by me, and it says, HTML by default is already accessible. It is your job not to. That is a great quote. Great quote. Semantic markup. You should be using semantic markup at all costs until you can't use semantic markup at all, right? So let's say you are building out a document. And if you were in the JavaScript space, JavaScript makes it extremely hard to build an accessible user experience. Why? Because React and Vue and Angular are not accessible out of the box at all. Those are JavaScript libraries and frameworks that do not provide accessibility. You're writing TypeScript, or you're writing JSX, or you're writing the NG stuff. I don't know what Angular calls that, but it's Angular stuff. You're writing Vue stuff. It's not accessible. It is your job to make it accessible. Now, I know I'm not harping on JavaScript, even though I'm not a JavaScript engineer, but I know that Angular is doing great stuff in the Angular component space that you can pull in. I've seen Emma actually talk about this before, so props. Props all the way around. But you should be using accessible semantic markup. A header, for instance, not to be confused with a heading level element that goes from H1 to H6. Heading level elements are for the document itself. It's a document outline. You shouldn't be styling H1s through H6s either. You shouldn't be styling any markup. That's what CSS is for, and don't be scared of CSS. The cascade is not scary, but don't use Tailwind either. A header should be used if you have a header at the top of your page, right? Your nav should be able to house your primary navigation, which should be an unordered list with list items, with anchor elements. And if that's not how you're structuring your navigation, we need to have a conversation. You have a main section that's usually between the header and the footer. This is where your main content would go. Within that, you can have an aside, and an aside is strictly just a sidebar. That's where that term came from, a sidebar. I want to have a sidebar. Well, let's call this piece of markup aside. It could be used as a side piece of content, not so much a sidebar, but a side piece of content. Within that, you can put in sections, right, to section out pieces of your content. You can also use article. I haven't seen article a whole lot in the wild. I really haven't seen aside a whole lot. It's usually a section. And then below that, you'd have your footer. Within here, you put your secondary, tertiary navigation, copyright statements, accessibility statement, links to that stuff, social media component, etc. With that being said, I'm going to show this little demo. Now, I don't do this demo because even though I know how to use screen readers, depending on the browser you're using them, what kind of version you're using, screen readers can be a little bit tricky. But I'm going to show why this stuff kind of matters with this video. If it plays, it should play. Yeah, okay, I'm going to have to,
This is Mark Sutton from the University of California, San Francisco.
Let me go to a minute and some change.
You can also use a Braille display as an input device.
End of navigation.
And what it does is it cleverly determines what's on the screen and presents you that information in a way that would allow for efficient navigation of these pages. So for example, I could just keep reading.
Banner 3 items. visited, link, image, home.
line by line, and we could be here all day. Or I could jump to the first heading on the page.
Heading level 2. Search for heading level 2. You are here. Heading level 1. Make videos accessible.
So as I'm moving down through the page, I can look for the category that interests me. And I'm just using
You are
commands built
currently
into
on
the
heading
screen
level.
reader. So that's all a pretty simple description of what a screen reader is all about. Now I'm going to go over and show a few examples of how that can fall apart. So I have a couple graphics on this page.
Mark Sutton hands on a MacBook Pro image.
So the first one is well described and uses an alt tag
You are currently on it.
to describe what that graphic is all about. Now we go to the next graphic,
Reader 042116.jpg.
much less useful. So it's important to use those elements. It's also true for tables. So I'm going to move to a table.
FDA approved medications. Table 3 columns, 5 rows. FDA approved medications.
So the table is pretty self-explanatory, and I'm going to move into the table.
Medicine. Approved. Column 2 of 3.
And then if I go down into the
Row,
table,
Medicine. Tolbutamide.
and as I
Column
move
1 of 3.
across,
Approved. 1975. Column 2 of 3.
we're getting the labels for the column headers and row headers. So it's important when programming tables, forms, and other elements on the web pages to use the proper HTML codes. I'll go to the
Table 3 columns.
second table on the page,
Medicine. Row 2 of 5 tolbutamide.
and as I'm in the
Tolbutamide.
table, I move across it.
Row. November 1995.
I get a date, but I don't know what that date is associated with. So it's important, as I was saying, to include proper coding tags for all these elements.
I have one little issue with that. The alt inside an image is not called a tag. I'm a stickler when it comes to that. It is an attribute, an alt attribute. Don't say alt tag, please. It's an attribute. And he was using Mac VoiceOver. VoiceOver is built into all your iOS, iPad OS, and your Mac OS machines. If you're on a Windows machine, you can download NVDA. That's a free screen reader. I would stay away from Chrome Vox. There's a little bit of a debate whether Narrator is good enough. I personally don't think so. And if you are on a Linux machine, any Linux distro, you can download Orca. Orca is the screen reader for Linux machines. So we're going to talk a little bit about alt attributes and images. This is another piece of low-hanging fruit. It's a common pitfall that's out there. What's up?
I have a question. How do you manage those tags when you're using third-party controls that generate code?
That's a great question. Sometimes it's out of your control. It's like you're using a CMS. But it's hard because you have to be able to get in that code somehow, or your company is going to get sued at some point. There has to be a way in somehow. And I'll talk about divs and non-semantic stuff here in a little bit when I get into ARIA. Keep them short and descriptive. Now, if you're NASA, you write a paragraph for your alt text within your attribute, which is cool. They're NASA. You can't tell them no, but at least you're doing something. This right here is the most important piece of this tag, this image element, is your alt attribute, the alt text within that. This image can be broken. You can just put IMG, and nothing else. But make sure you have an alt text, the alt text in there within that attribute. Because that image could break. This happened in my workshop. Somebody was on their proxy in my workshop and could not download any images from Unsplash. Perfect example. So part of my workshop is you do all these things I talk about, you run audits on them, you see where you're at, you go in, you fix those things. Well, they clearly saw that it was messed up. They went and fixed it, but at least they got the alt text coming through if they couldn't get the image come through. All right, if I said this is good alt text within an alt attribute, what would you say? And I don't know Alice's last name. I tried looking it up during lunch. I don't know. There's like no information out there. Is this good enough? No? I've had some people be like, no, maybe it's good enough. No, it's not good enough. Alice, it's better than, but there's a reason it's better than nothing, and we're going to get into that. So, watch your tone back there, guy. It's cool, but it's not great. What about this? Alice looking down a rabbit hole. This good? Better? This is just fine. This is just fine. Because Alice could be who? Alice who? Alice from the Brady Bunch? Could be. I don't know. Is Alice somebody in your family? I don't know, right? So Dave has an opinion about alt attributes. Just joking. We do have these things called decorative images out there, or what they call eye candy. It doesn't give, these types of images don't have context to the experience that is there, that's being presented to the user. You still need an alt attribute, but you put an alt attribute equaling an empty string or empty quotes. The reason you do that is because the second this runs through an auditing tool like Axe or Wave, the Wave engine, any one of those, even Lighthouse uses Axe under the hood, you'll get dinged in an audit because there is no alt attribute there. So decorative eye candy images, it's up to the author to determine the purpose of that image. The content team, the design team, the marketing team, it shouldn't always be left up to the developer, unless it's like a freelance project, something you're doing yourself, or like another project, like a personal project. It's up to the author to determine whether or not that alt attribute needs to be there or not, and they need to give you that information. If they just give you a word like castle, that shit's not going to cut it. So work with them. Open up the communication and collaboration around why accessibility matters, because they might not know, right? Never leave out the alt attribute. Here's another one. This is a very, very common pitfall, low-hanging fruit. Color contrast. What does that mean, color contrast? Can you read this? You sure? Can you read that? Would you want to be in a movie if I created a character around you? Color contrast is the foreground, how the foreground color bounces off the background color, right? That is what color contrast is. A lot of times you see a lot of websites, a lot of applications, a lot of tools with really bad color contrast. This does not help the user. I've even heard white on black and black on white is not that great. I've heard this before from accessibility professionals, which is probably true. It's all algorithmic based. It's based on color. It's also based on font size. So the smaller the font, the worse the color, you're going to fail. The bigger the font, the color could be the same and you'll pass. Why would you pass? Why do you think you'd pass? Let's say you have a size 14 point. They go off points, they don't go off pixels. Point, font, 14 point. You have light gray text on a white background, you'll fail. Let's say you bump it up to 18 point and you keep the same color combo. Why would you pass? Part of that, yes. If the text is bigger, it's in your face. Therefore, you can see it, technically, right? So it'll pass an audit. You'll pass AAA and AA. I've seen it. I've tested it. Color contrast matters, but all too many times, it's always overlooked because you might have a brand colors or marketing colors, right? If that's the case, you need to have conversations with people. You might be able just to change it a little bit and pass and not be able to distinguish the color. AA minimum is 4.5 to 1. AAA minimum is 7 to 1 when it comes to the algorithm for color contrast. So some good numbers to know. You don't have to memorize them. Plenty of information out there. But just so you know, 4.5 to 1 and 7 to 1 are for AA and AAA when it comes to color contrast conformance levels. Here's another piece of low-hanging fruit, buttons versus links. This is my favorite. I love this. What is a button used for? Submitting a form or an action, maybe? An action. Why do we use links? Anchor tags, links, why do we use them? Navigation. Stop using buttons as links and links as buttons, please. We have a semantic button element with inherent accessibility, states and properties that should be used as your button. And you don't have to put a roll of button on a button. unless it's like something that's super, super, super custom, which chances are it's not going to happen. But you don't need a roll of button on your button. You're just repeating yourself. It could throw issues with the accessibility tree. Yes, there is an AO or an accessibility object tree, object DOM. There's also a CSS object model. There's a lot of these things, not just HTML. My friend Marcy Sutton has a great article on this. If you don't follow Marcy on Twitter, follow Marcy on Twitter. It's Marcy Sutton. You could Google links versus buttons, Marcy Sutton. But it's links versus buttons in modern web applications, and she has a whole article on why you should be using buttons for buttons and links for links. Another one that I love, and I give a talk about this, the talk is called Focusing on Focus, is Focus. Well, what is Focus? Well, Focus is written like this. It's a pseudo class, it's CSS, it's not to be, you shouldn't be afraid of it at all. But the one thing that would scare you, or scare me, is when this happens. Outline 0 or outline none. When you set the outline of the focus to 0 or none, what happens? You remove the focus for everybody. Everybody. Keyboard users, mouse users, screen reader users, a handful of different AT, assistive technology. Don't do this. Is everybody familiar with a CSS reset? Okay. Does anybody use Eric Meyer's reset? Or a version of that? Okay. Anybody use Normalize? Who uses Bootstrap? You're using Normalize. Focus isn't really a big thing in the Normalize reset, at least that I have seen, but Eric Meyer resets all of his focus styles, but he explicitly puts in the bottom of that CSS file to reset these to your liking, which means put them back in and don't leave them out. And if your marketing director, or your VP, or anybody within your organization that isn't a front-end developer says, I do not like that focus ring, I don't like the gray, I don't like the blue, I don't like the green, because every focus ring is different depending on whether you're using a mouse, keyboard, Safari, Edge, Chrome, Brave, I don't care what the browser is, they're all different. The user agent styling is different. Even though Edge is using Chromium, they're different things. Don't do this. If you see it in your code base, figure out why it's there, remove it, or add it somewhere else. Hopefully you're using Sass and vanilla CSS or CSS modules and not CSS and JS or Tailwind. Just joking, use whatever you want. Focus visible, this is a really, really cool feature in CSS. It's well supported across the board. It's not supported in IE anymore, or at all, but these are the main browsers we care about right here. Great support. I found out about this from Unicravitz. Wait, what did I say? CSS focus visible, sorry. This is a different thing. I found out about this years ago. It was a polyfill at one point, created by the amazing people over at Google, Alice Boxhall, Rob Dodson, a handful of other people. It used to be a polyfill, now it's totally supported. And the way it works is, based on heuristics, it'll be able to tell whether you're using a mouse or a keyboard and add the focus back in. Why did we need that? Well, apparently a bunch of people were complaining that I use a mouse and I don't need to see the focus. So they made this, focus visible. Using a mouse, it takes some focus away from buttons, because buttons are on a list that gets removed. And then the keyboard interaction, when you tab through it, it adds that focus back into all those elements. Really powerful stuff. I've had people come up to me after talks and show me that they've created issues in their organization repos to put this in. Really, really great. One way to handle focus. Here's another one. Focus within. Focus within is another pseudo class. It's written like this, : focus dash within. I've heard about this from Unicravitz 3 years ago. She tweeted about it. It was on MDN, Mozilla Developer Network. If you don't use MDN, you should be using MDN. If you don't use Can I Use, you should be using Can I Use to learn about all these amazing new features that are happening in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The talk I was going to give talked about all that cool stuff that you could do today in CSS and stuff that's coming. And I reference Can I Use a lot. Great support, not so much in IE. Is anybody still like doing like old school, like I guess old school IE, it just went away. But like a little bit, I've given talks before within the past couple years and people were still designing for IE 8, believe it or not. Like old school kiosks in malls and stuff like that. The way this works, You add it onto a parent element, and the second you focus within that parent element, that whole element gets focus. Got a little bit of orange and blue here for Ed. I see you back there. The whole thing gets focused, so you know you are right there in that experience. Really cool stuff. And you have a focus method using JavaScript. This is usually when you're messing with tab index, and you shouldn't mess with tab index. But if you need to focus stuff back in and out or into menus, you would have to use this. Anybody familiar with Two Blind Brothers? Yay, nay? Two blind brothers are brothers who create clothes, and they're blind. They have a feature down here, a simulator. It's also in mobile. I was talking about field of vision disabilities. This is how they see every day. They have Stargardt's disease. It's a form of macular degeneration. There's 3 different kinds. You have one like this where it goes out. You have another one where it sort of creates like a tunnel vision. And you have like a mixed one where it's spotty. And at some point, those spots start to connect, right? Focus matters because there might be something in the bottom of the screen that they need to get to. And if there's no focus, they cannot use that experience anymore. All right, let's talk about ARIA. What am I looking on time? I can get through 20 slides in 5 minutes. No, we got 10. Let's talk about ARIA. ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And what this isn't the technical definition, my definition. I like to put my definition on a lot of things. It's almost like the syntactic sugar you don't see that makes content accessible. You use this when you're writing, when you have to use divs, when you've exhausted all of your semantic markup, and you have to create custom things that we don't have today in HTML, you would use ARIA. What is the first rule of ARIA? Does anybody know? Shh. First rule of ARIA, don't use ARIA. Chris, you're telling us all of these cool things, and you're telling us to use ARIA. Now you're telling me not to use ARIA. Why? Because ARIA is not there to fix your accessibility problems. It is not a replacement for semantic markup. You should be using semantic markup right off the rip until you can't use it anymore. Then you start breaking in ARIA to make those experiences accessible. Especially, it helps a lot with screen readers as well. It's something you need once you exhausted your semantic markup. We have some common patterns out here. This is kind of one of those low-hanging fruits that I keep talking about. Social media components, right? 9 times out of 10, these icons are going to be from Font Awesome, or they're going to be some type of image, like you saw on the screen reader. Or if you're using a CMS, you were going to upload an image to a media library. That image is going to be downloaded as some type of hash. 1x24570.png, and it don't mean nothing to anybody. This does. You need to provide an ARIA label on that. ARIA label equals Twitter, because that's going to announce that to the screen reader user. The sighted users, you're going to be able to take advantage of this, but you can see what this is saying. This is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. But it will announce to your user, button, focusable, link, Twitter. To interact with this link, Control, Shift, Option, Space. I have this stuff memorized. What about modals? Bootstrap does a really good job at this. I commend Bootstrap for this. They do a really good job with their modal integration, what they already provide for the responsive framework. 9 times out of 10, this X is either going to be the letter X, ampersand, times, semicolon, or an image or an icon. When you hit focus, when you're focused in this modal and you focus to this, it has no context within that button to shift focus back to the main window. This is what we call a focus trap. You're trapping focus from the user, and they can't go back to their main window to keep doing what they were doing. How do you fix this? This is how you fix that. ARIA label, close or exit. Bootstrap does a great job at doing this. You hook up some JavaScript to this button, it announces to the user, focus button has focus, close, modal, or close something. Hit that, hit your keyboard, and then it moves up, out, modal goes away, focus shifts back to the main window. And we have some roles. I'm not going to go super in depth into ARIA roles and states and properties. I give a talk on this. But some common rules that we have when you can't use divs because of a CM, or you can't use semantic markup because of a CMS. Banner, you put a roll of banner on that for a header, a roll of content info in the footer, and I think you might still have to do content info in the footer because the screen reader doesn't like announce footer, right? You have complementary for complementary content on the page, and then main is if you aren't using a main element, you would use a role of main. Tons of information out there. Just Google it, ARIA roles, Way ARIA, Web Accessibility Initiative - ARIA, tons and tons of information out there. I hope all of you are as excited about accessibility as I am. I hope all of you had amazing DevReach, tons of resources. I'll leave this up for like 3 seconds because I'm getting kicked out of this room. 1, 2, I can tweet these if you don't want to take a picture. bit.ly/A11Y-pitfalls. That's me, that's my time. Thank you for being here. Thanks to Progress and DevReach. I bid you adieu. Later.